no colors anymore. I want them to turn black. I watch the world strut by inside some empty clothes.
We definitely seem to be painting the whole show black tonight. It's usually great that our second-hour guests don't get into the foray of adult film and cinema that we discussed during our first hour, or we wouldn't have any guests at all. A great book that has hit the stands that I picked up and was able to get through was Nick Redfern's Contactees. Now, I want to say that when I first started to really get into the scope of the UFO, some people call it a dilemma, some people call it a problem, some people call it an obsession. Some of the first work that I had read was concerning contactees, especially looking at this stuff way back in the 70s. So it's great to have Nick Redfern with us tonight. How you been, Nick?
I'm good, thanks. Hey, guys.
How you doing?
Good, thanks.
So I got to give you the lip service of the fact that Contactees was a fast read and a great read.
Oh, thanks a lot. I appreciate that.
One of the first questions that I have for you is the fact that so many people involved in the UFO community, I know you've been involved in it for years, seem to focus on a lot of new cases, a lot of things that are coming out now in a relationship to older cases, especially Socorro, Roswell. But you went back and you took a look at the contactee phenomena, which I don't think a lot of authors do. What led you to this subject?
Well, basically, what it was, as you said, it's very much, I guess, like an older part of ufology from at least, 5 decades ago, possibly a bit longer. And, unfortunately, sometimes within ufology, people have short memories, or they're just not exposed to some of the earlier material. I think there's a tendency, particularly with UFO magazines and publications that, obviously want to sell copies, that they're very newsworthy, which is good. But historically speaking, you don't see a great deal of material. And unfortunately what happens is that you have people who are new to the subject who know all about Area 51, alien abductions, flying triangles, that sort of thing. But they kind of, give you a little bit of a blank stare when you talk about long-haired space aliens and contactees and space brothers. So what I wanted to try and do was sort of bring, I guess, to people who weren't fully aware of the subject, the various intricacies and some of the more interesting cases within the contactee arena. But not just to, parrot fashion and relate the cases, but also to present various theories that I thought were worth looking at as we try and solve what's going on, if you like.
It's interesting for me to see a progression from a lot of people who had very similar experiences involving what we deem the contactee experience, and now a lot of people having also very similar experience in what we call the abductee experience. Why do you think so many people have written off the contactee experience when the collective similarities are still there?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are key similarities. For example, I guess, the very fact that they're having some sort of communication. The other one about, warnings about the future of the planet, whereas 50 years ago it was warnings about nuclear war. Today it's ecological destruction and things like that. I think really the one reason more than any other why people, or many people within ufology, dismiss the contactee movement is because, I guess, as our technology develops to the point where it is now, we kind of perceive the alien abduction scenario as being logical, that very alien-looking creatures would come down and treat us like lab rats and subject us to experiments, because that's what we do. It sounds more believable in that sense and logical than the idea of meeting human-like aliens, on mountain tops and in forests and desert locations, and having like a literal one-to-one communication, which sounds a little bit, even as I admit, kind of like a classic 50s sci-fi scenario.
I think that's one thing that appealed to me, especially when I was younger, was because I was a huge fan of George Powell. I was a huge fan of these saucer movies, and the fact that the contactee movement definitely mirrored a lot of what we were seeing in cinema at the time, too. Now, there were a lot of different personalities in the contactee movement, and some personalities that had very lurid pasts. Give us a brief history. Who were some of the first contactees, especially those that came to light within the UFO community?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one person more than any other who was, I guess, the definitive contactee was George Adamski. Adamski was a Polish guy who moved to the US with his family when he was literally like 2 years old. And he had kind of like an alternative background years before his UFO experiences allegedly began. In the 1930s, for example, he had an organization in California called the Royal Order of Tibet, which was sort of like an alternative lifestyle, what, you know, in the 60s we might call like a hippie commune type of thing. And he, I guess in that respect, he was kind of almost primed, you know, as someone to have this type of experience. And, you know, that's what he claimed, that he had this encounter out in the California desert, saw this classic, again, 50s style saucer come down, had a very human-looking entity come out of it. There was reportedly a telepathic exchange, again, on the concerns about atomic war and various other things to do with the economy and religion. And, you know, he sort of really kicked off what we see today and back in the 50s as the definitive archetypal image of the contactee. But a lot of people, you know, forget again or don't realize Adamski was just one of many. Where he was different was that he was probably the most popular in terms of book sales, going on the lecture circuit, and being, you know, promoted in the media and things like that. But I mean, there are other early ones like Daniel Fry, who had sort of an outrageous story about claiming to have been taken on board a UFO and flown across the United States, which is an outrageous story, but equally interesting, which makes it all the more puzzling. He's actually a well-respected employee at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. So this is one of the things that we get with a lot of these early contactees, is that they had unusual stories, sometimes alternative backgrounds, but many of them, you know, they were the sort of person who you would naturally imagine would make up something like this. I mean, George Van Tassel, for example, who went on to put on a yearly conference at a place called Giant Rock in California, again, one of the early contactees. And his conferences attracted audiences upwards of 10,000 a year. And he had a background in the aviation industry. He was actually an engineer with Hughes Aircraft, actually working alongside Howard Hughes. So again, he was no fool, no fantasist, but, you know, he was coming up with these incredible stories when he actually already had a very good job and a well-paid job in the aviation industry.
Now, I guess this is John. I guess Billy Meyer obviously would fall into that category as one of the more well-known contactees.
Yeah, certainly John Billy Meyer sort of came, you know, a few years later.
Right.
Adamski, Daniel Fry, Van Tassel, they were all very much late 40s, early 50s. Now, Billy Meyer did claim a number of contacts allegedly when he was a child, but he then reported a number of other incidents from the 50s to the 60s, and then pretty much waned until the mid-1970s. And of course, I guess equally as well known for his experiences, you know, are his photographs, which,
right,
you know, even the skeptics have to admit look pretty good, you know,
Yeah.
which they do. You know, you look at a lot of them,